I caught my future brother-in-law's mother staring at me across the table, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips, and I gave her the smallest shake of my head I could manage without anyone else noticing. My mother was mid-sentence, gesturing at me with the same hand that held her Aperol spritz. "This is our other daughter," she said to the table, to the Whitfields, to the entire private room at the restaurant on King Street West. "She does residential cleaning, mostly downtown condos." My father nodded along, swirling his scotch. "We tried, believe me. Some kids just don't have the drive. Nobody at that table knew my name was on the lease of the building 3 blocks from where we sat. Nobody knew I owned it." The Whitfield matriarch, Patricia's future mother-in-law, a woman who ran the wealth management arm of one of the big 5 banks, set her glass down slowly. "Wait," she said, looking at me with new focus. "Aren't you the one who—" I caught her eye again. She stopped. "My name is Renee, I'm 36, and for 14 years I let my own family believe I scrubbed toilets for a living, while I quietly built a property management company that now oversees 22 buildings across the GTA. Before I get into how we ended up at that dinner, you should understand what it was like growing up in my house, because none of this makes sense without it. I grew up in Oakville, the kind of town where the driveways are longer than some people's backyards, and everyone's lawn looks like it was vacuumed. My parents, Gordon and Marlene, appearances were the whole operation for them. Country club dues paid before the mortgage some months. A leased Lexus my father couldn't actually afford, traded in every 2 years so the neighbors wouldn't notice the same car twice. My younger sister, Patricia, was the proof of concept. 3 years younger than me, and from the time she could walk she was being told she was destined for something. Dance lessons, then equestrian, then a semester in Florence to find herself. She never had to find a job, because finding a job would have implied she needed one. I was the experiment that didn't take. Stubborn, practical, more interested in numbers than appearances. When I was 20, in my second year at Western, my parents quietly withdrew $11,000 from the education fund my grandmother had set up for me. Money that was supposed to be untouchable until I finished my degree. To cover a credit card Patricia had run up buying things I still don't fully understand the purpose of. When I found out, I sat my mother down and asked her how. She told me without blinking that family helps family, and that OSAP existed for a reason. I didn't fight it. I dropped to part-time, took out the loans, and started cleaning houses on weekends to cover the gap, because a girl in my res building needed someone to do her parents' cottage before Thanksgiving, and word spread from there. It was supposed to be temporary. It became my whole identity to my family, because once they had a label for me, they stopped looking any closer. For the next decade and a half, Renee cleans houses was the entire sentence my parents needed. They never asked what neighborhoods. They never asked who my clients were. If they had, they might have noticed that by 26 I wasn't cleaning anyone's house anymore. I was managing the cleaning contracts, the maintenance contracts, the leasing, for buildings I had started buying with partners I'd met doing exactly that work. By 30, Birchwood Property Group had my name on the incorporation papers as managing partner. My parents kept telling people I did some kind of housekeeping thing downtown. Which brings us to the dinner. Patricia, 29 now, had gotten engaged to a man named Holden. Old Toronto banking family, the kind with a cottage in Muskoka that's been in the family since before Muskoka was a brand. His mother, Vivian, ran private wealth at one of the big banks. I'd actually crossed paths with Vivian professionally 18 months earlier when her firm advised on a refinancing deal for one of my buildings. We'd shaken hands across a boardroom table. She knew exactly who I was. My family did not know that she knew because my uncle didn't know who I was, period. The engagement dinner was at a restaurant my mother had clearly chosen to perform wealth she didn't have. I almost didn't go. I went because Patricia, for all her faults, was still my sister, and some stubborn part of me kept hoping that one dinner, eventually my parents would introduce me without the asterisk. They didn't. My mother did the cleaning line within 4 minutes of sitting down. My father added the bit about giving up on me before the breadbasket arrived, and Vivienne, 2 seats down, went very still. "Wait," she said. "Aren't you the one who—" I shook my head at her, just barely. She read it instantly, the read of a woman who spent 30 years in rooms where what isn't said matters more than what is, and pivoted smooth as anything into asking the table about the venue for the wedding instead. I exhaled. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I want to be clear that I wasn't there plotting anything. I had genuinely decided, somewhere around my 30th birthday, that correcting my parents wasn't worth the energy. I'd built a life that didn't need their approval. I had an apartment in a building I owned overlooking the lake, a business that employed 41 people, and a therapist who'd helped me understand that their behavior was about their own insecurity, not my worth. I'd made peace with being the family disappointment. What I hadn't made peace with, apparently, was what happened over the following 3 weeks. It started small. My mother called me on a Tuesday, voice syrupy in the specific way it only got when she wanted something. The venue, a heritage building in Yorkville my parents absolutely could not afford on their own, required the deposit holder to do a walk-through cleaning before their own crew came in 2 days later, some clause about respecting the building's antique fixtures. My mother explained Elray as though this were obvious, that since I already had the equipment, I could just handle it, save them the contractor fee. I told her I was busy with work. She told me Patricia would be devastated if her venue wasn't presentable, and didn't I want my sister's wedding to be special? I went. Not because I believed the excuse, I'd managed enough heritage properties to know that clause didn't exist, but because I wanted to see the venue, and frankly, some old habit in me still hadn't fully unlearned showing up when called. I spent 2 hours in a ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows, wiping down chair rails that didn't need wiping, while my mother supervised from a folding chair and texted on her phone. Then came the dress fitting. Patricia wanted me there for moral support, which turned into me being asked, mid-fitting, whether I could spot her $400 for the alterations because her card had been declined. I paid it. I always paid it. It was easier than the conversation that came after if I didn't. Then came the dinner where things actually cracked. 3 weeks before the wedding, my mother organized what she called a family toast, really just an excuse for another meal where the Whitfields could be impressed. We were at a different restaurant this time, a steakhouse on Bay Street, the kind of place where the bill for a table of 8 runs past $2,000 before anyone orders dessert. Patricia and Holden sat at the head. My parents flanked them. I was down at the end near Vivienne and her husband, which in hindsight might have been the most important seating decision of the entire saga, though nobody planned it that way. Dinner went the way these dinners always went. My father told the story about my college dropout years, slightly more dramatic each retelling. My mother mentioned, apropos of nothing, that I'd be happy to coordinate the day of cleanup at the venue since I knew the space now. I said nothing. I'd learned that arguing only extended the conversation. Then the bill came. It landed near my father, who picked it up, glanced at it, and set it back down with a small, performative wince. "Renee," he said, not quite looking at me, "we did the deposit on the florist this week. Things are tight." The table went quiet in that specific Canadian way, not silent but suddenly very interested in the bread. I want to say I handled it gracefully. I didn't, not at first. Something in me, 14 years of something, just sort of came loose. I looked at my father and said, "Tight from what? You haven't paid for anything this entire wedding." "I have." And then, because the dam had a crack in it now and there was no stopping the rest, I listed it. The deposit on the venue my parents claimed credit for, the $400 at the fitting. The florist deposit they'd just referenced, which I had also quietly paid 2 days earlier, after my mother sent me a single text that just said, "Having trouble with the florist, can you call them?" My mother's face did something complicated. My father reached for his scotch like it owed him an explanation, and Vivienne beside me set her fork down very deliberately. "I'm sorry," she said to the table, in the tone of someone who has run a great many difficult meetings, "but I think I need to understand something. Renee, you're paying for this wedding?" My mother laughed, a thin, brittle sound. "Renee cleans houses, Vivienne. She's not. It's not like that, she just helps out where she can." Vivienne looked at me, I looked back at her, and then I just said it. "I own Birchwood Property Group. 22 buildings across the GTA. I haven't cleaned a house professionally in 9 years. I paused. "Mom, I started cleaning houses because you took my education fund to cover Patricia's credit card. I kept doing it because it was easier than fighting you on what I should be doing with my life. You never asked what it turned into. You just kept telling people the same story year after year because it made you comfortable." Nobody said anything for what felt like a very long time. Holden, to his credit, was the one who finally spoke. He looked at his mother, then at me, and said slowly, "Mom, you said the Birchwood deal was one of the best refinancing files you'd worked on all year." Vivienne nodded, still watching me. "It was. I had no idea you were the same Renee. Your mother described you so differently I genuinely didn't connect it." My mother's face had gone the color of the tablecloth, My father wasn't looking at anyone. I'd like to tell you I felt triumphant. Mostly I felt tired and a little sad, the way you feel finishing something that should have ended a long time ago. I paid the bill, old habits, and I left before dessert. The wedding itself happened 2 weeks later, and I almost didn't go to that either. I went because Patricia called me, crying, 2 days before and said something I hadn't expected. That she'd never actually known, that she'd grown up believing the story too, and that finding it out felt like learning she'd been lied to about her own sister for her entire life. She asked me to come. She asked me to sit at the family table, not off to the side. I said yes. At the reception, my father stood up to give his toast, and for the first time in 36 years, he didn't make a joke about my career. He said stiffly, like the words cost him something physical, that he was proud of both his daughters, and that he'd recently learned some things about how hard one of them had worked without anyone noticing. It wasn't an apology. My parents have never managed an actual apology, not before that night and not since. But it was the first time he'd said the word proud anywhere near my name in public, and I let myself have that, small as it was. Vivian found me near the bar later that night, 2 glasses of wine in. For what it's worth, she said, the way you handled that dinner told me more about your character than the refinancing file did. And that file told me a lot. She raised her glass. To people who build things quietly. I didn't fix things with my parents that night, and I haven't fully fixed them since. We talk now, carefully, the way you talk to people you love but no longer fully trust. My mother has stopped telling people I clean houses. She started telling people I'm in real estate, which is its own kind of funny, the way she still can't quite say the whole truth out loud even when the truth is finally good. But Patricia and I are closer than we've ever been, and last month she asked if she could come see one of my buildings, actually see it, and I said yes, and she cried in the lobby, and I let her. I think about that dinner sometimes, the version of myself sitting at the end of the table, with 22 buildings, to my name, and nobody at that table knowing it. I don't think I'd do it differently. I think some truths need the right room and the right moment, and you don't always get to choose when that moment arrives. Sometimes it just arrives, the way Vivian's fork went still on the table, the way my mother's face changed color, the way 14 years came undone in about 90 seconds, because somebody finally asked the right question out loud.